I never wanted to smell like a bakery. For an alpha, biology is supposed to be a straightforward, respectable thing you present. You get a scent, usually something sharp, aggressive, or earthy like cedarwood, winter rain, or leather, and the world respects you. That was the unspoken rule of our society. But the universe, it seemed, had a deeply twisted sense of humor when it came to my presentation. I didn't smell like a thunderstorm or a dark forest. I smelled like strawberry cupcakes, sweet, soft, and entirely ridiculous. From the moment I presented, I had to work twice as hard just to be taken seriously. I forced myself to be sharper, faster, and more meticulous than anyone else. That relentless drive was the only reason I managed to land a job at Vance Group, a towering financial empire right in the ruthless heart of Manhattan. The pay was exorbitant, exactly what I needed to make a dent in the crushing mountain of medical bills my mother had accumulated over the past 3 years. I needed this job to survive. But for the past 3 weeks, surviving the 45th floor felt less like a career and more like a daily combat mission. And the sole reason for that was Julian Vance. Julian wasn't just an alpha, he was an enigma. As the CEO and the heir to the company, he was the man people terrifyingly referred to as the Wall Street tyrant. He possessed a flawless, sculpted face that rarely showed any emotion, and he carried a scent of black coffee so bitter dark and overwhelmingly dominant that it could suffocate a room the moment he stepped out of his private elevator. People didn't just respect Julian, they feared him. Every time I had to enter his office, my stomach tied itself into heavy knots. I took scent suppressants religiously every morning until my head throbbed, desperate to hide my embarrassing strawberry pheromones. But in a high-stress environment, surrounded by the intimidating aura of an enigma, slip-ups were inevitable. Today was one of those miserable days. I knocked twice before pushing open the heavy glass door of his office, carrying the finalized Q3 financial reports. Julian was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the gray New York skyline. He looked like a king, surveying a city he was about to tear down. The air in his office was thick with his scent, the sharp, unapologetic aroma of dark roasted espresso. It was intimidating, yet strangely grounding. "Mr. Vance, the reports you asked for," I said, keeping my voice as even and professional as possible. He turned slowly. His dark eyes locked onto me with a piercing intensity. And then, it happened. The sheer pressure of his gaze caused a tiny spike in my anxiety, and a faint, sweet waft of strawberry slipped past the chemical barrier of my scent blockers. Instantly, Julian's posture went completely rigid. I watched as his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. A dark, terrifying scowl crossed his face, his features stiffening into a mask of pure hostility. He didn't say a single word. He just stood there, his eyes narrowing into a glare that felt like physical pressure against my chest. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and suffocating. He looked absolutely furious. I swallowed hard, placing the folder on his massive mahogany desk, my hands trembling slightly despite my best efforts to hide it. "I will leave this here, sir." "Get out," he muttered. His voice was a low, gravelly vibration that sent a cold shiver down my spine. I didn't need to be told twice. I practically fled the room, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind me. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the employee break room, aggressively gripping a paper cup of cold water. Carter, a beta from the marketing department, and the closest thing I had to a friend in this sterile building, leaned against the counter. He watched me with a mixture of pity and dry amusement. "He glared at you again, didn't he?" Carter asked, taking a slow sip of his own coffee. Glared is an understatement. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling a long, frustrated breath. He looked like he wanted to throw me out of the 45th floor window. "Carter, I swear I'm doing the job perfectly. My schedules are flawless, my reports are meticulous, and I anticipate his needs before he even asks. But the second I walk into his office, he looks at me like my existence is a personal insult to him." Carter sighed, shaking his head. "Look, Ollie, everyone knows the rumors. Julian Vance is ruthless. He values efficiency, dominance, and cold, hard numbers. He despises anything weak, soft, or well, sweet. Your scent, no offense, man, is the exact opposite of everything he stands for in this corporate Shark Tank. To him, sweet means incompetent. It is honestly a miracle he has not fired you yet." The words stung, even if Carter didn't mean them maliciously. He despises anything sweet. Of course he did. Why wouldn't the Wall Street tyrant hate the guy who smelled like a kid's birthday party? I had spent my entire life trying to prove that my worth wasn't defined by my ridiculous biology. I had sacrificed sleep, a social life, and my own peace of mind just to be taken seriously as an alpha. And yet here I was, being silently judged and despised by the one man whose approval dictated my career and my family's survival. A quiet, burning anger started to replace the anxiety in my chest. I was tired of shrinking. I was tired of feeling like my natural scent was a mistake that offended his delicate, ruthless sensibilities. If Julian Vance hated my scent so much, fine. I could play this game. That evening, after my shift ended, I didn't take the subway straight back to my tiny apartment in Brooklyn. Instead, I marched into a high-end alpha grooming store in Manhattan. I walked straight past the scent neutralizers and headed for the strongest, most aggressive colognes on the shelves. I picked up a heavy, matte black bottle. Midnight Timber. The label promised a heavily synthesized, overpowering scent of spicy pine needles, cracked black pepper, and bitter cedarwood. It was the kind of smell that punched people in the face. It was the scent of a textbook obnoxious, dominant alpha. I bought it without a second thought. As I walked out of the store, the cold night air hitting my face, my fingers tightened around the small shopping bag. If Julian Vance wanted a cold, aggressive alpha assistant who didn't smell like strawberries, that was exactly what he was going to get tomorrow morning. Let's see how much he liked that. The next morning, I stepped out of the elevator onto the 45th floor, leaving a cloud of aggressively masculine fragrance in my wake. Midnight Timber was not a subtle cologne. It was the olfactory equivalent of someone kicking down a door. Within 3 minutes of my arrival, 2 junior analysts had sneezed, and Carter had physically backed away from my desk, waving a hand in front of his face. "Good Lord, Ollie," Carter choked out, his eyes watering. "Did you bathe in a lumberjack's tears? You smell like a forest fire in a pepper factory." "It's called projecting authority," I replied flatly, straightening my tie. "If Mr. Vance wants a ruthless environment, I am simply adapting to corporate culture." Carter looked at me like I had lost my mind. "You are going to suffocate him." "That is the plan," I thought grimly. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the private elevator chimed. Julian Vance strode onto the floor, his presence immediately lowering the temperature of the room by several degrees. He looked as immaculate and terrifying as always in his tailored charcoal suit. As usual, I picked up his morning schedule and followed him into his office, closing the heavy glass door behind us. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," I said, stepping closer to his desk. Julian didn't look up from the tablet in his hand. He merely nodded, taking a deep, subconscious breath, a habit I had noticed he always did when I first entered the room in the mornings. But this time, instead of the faint, sweet trace of strawberries, his lungs were assaulted by the harsh, synthetic punch of spicy pine needles and cracked black pepper. Julian froze. The tablet slipped from his grip, clattering loudly against the mahogany desk. His head snapped up, his dark eyes wide for a fraction of a second, before narrowing into a glare so lethal it could have shattered glass. The air in the room instantly grew heavy as his own pheromones spiked. The usual dark roasted espresso scent turned burnt bitter and suffocatingly intense. "What?" Julian growled, his voice vibrating with a barely contained fury. "Is that smell?" I stood my ground, fighting the urge to step back. "It is my new cologne, sir. Midnight Timber." I realized my natural scent might have been distracting or unprofessional for the executive floor. I took the initiative to correct it. For a moment, I thought he was going to fire me on the spot. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles ticked. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic breaths. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a predator that had just been backed into a corner. "Get it off," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. "Sir?" I said get it off. "Go wash it off right now, Hayes," he practically yelled, his composure violently fracturing. "I cannot, sir. It is an oil-based neutralizer," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly polite despite the racing of my heart. "It lasts for 48 hours. If looks could kill, I would have been reduced to ash on his expensive carpet." Julian slammed his hands onto the desk, leaning forward. But before he could issue what I assumed would be my immediate termination, the intercom buzzed. The executives had arrived for the 9:30 a.m. strategy meeting. What followed was the most agonizing 3 hours of my professional life. Without his usual distraction, Julian's renowned coldness mutated into pure, unadulterated tyranny. He tore through the strategy meeting like a hurricane. He shredded proposals, openly mocked the head of acquisitions, and fired a senior consultant on the spot for a minor typo in a risk assessment. His bitter coffee scent was so oppressive that 2 Omega executives had to excuse themselves because they could not breathe properly. Sitting in the corner taking minutes, I watched the chaos unfold. Julian was pacing, his hands constantly clenching and unclenching. He looked agitated, twitchy, almost panicked beneath his furious exterior. And I wasn't the only one who noticed. Sitting across the long conference table was Marcus Sterling. As a senior board member and Julian's biggest rival within the company, Marcus was a man who thrived on finding weaknesses. While everyone else was cowering, Marcus was watching Julian with a slow, calculating smirk. "Julian, you seem remarkably unsettled today," Marcus drawled, leaning back in his leather chair. "Perhaps the pressure of the upcoming merger is finally getting to you." Julian stopped pacing, his eyes locked onto Marcus with murderous intent. "My mental state is none of your concern, Marcus. Focus on your failing quarterly projections." "I am just saying," Marcus replied smoothly, standing up. "A CEO who loses control of his emotions is a liability to the shareholders. We wouldn't want a repeat of your father's incidents, would we? The mention of Julian's father caused the Enigma's pheromones to explode with such violent hostility that I physically flinched. "Get out," Julian snarled to the entire room. "All of you now." The executives scrambled for the door. I gathered my tablet to leave, but as I reached the exit, Julian's voice cracked like a whip. "Not you, Hayes, stay." I froze. Marcus gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder as he walked past. "Good luck, kid," he whispered. When the door clicked shut, it was just the two of us. The silence was deafening. I braced myself for the verbal assault. I needed this job, but I wasn't going to let him bully me just because he couldn't handle Marcus Sterling. "If you are going to fire me, Mr. Vance, just do it," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "But blaming me for your inability to handle a board member is completely out of line." Julian stared at me. He was breathing heavily, one hand gripping the edge of the table, so hard his knuckles were white. He looked exhausted, desperate even. "I am not firing you," he finally said, his voice strained. I blinked, thoroughly confused. "You are not?" "No," he stepped closer, stopping right at the edge of my suffocating midnight timber scent cloud. He grimaced, as if the smell physically pained him, but forced himself to maintain eye contact. "Effective immediately. You are no longer just an executive assistant. You are my personal aide. You will be by my side for all internal meetings, external negotiations, and corporate travels." My jaw dropped. "What, sir? That is a massive promotion. I haven't even finished my trial period." "I don't care," Julian interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You report only to me, and your desk is being moved inside my office." "Inside your office?" I echoed, horrified. "Why?" Julian's eyes flickered away for a fraction of a second. "Because I require maximum efficiency, and you keep me grounded." He swallowed hard, visibly struggling with his next words. "But if you ever wear that god-awful pine cologne again, I will personally throw you off the roof." Before I could process what had just happened, he walked back to his desk and collapsed into his chair, rubbing his temples as if fighting a massive migraine. I walked out of the office in a daze. I had expected to be fired. Instead, I had practically been chained to the Wall Street tyrant. 2 hours later, an urgent company-wide memo hit every inbox on the 45th floor. Carter read it aloud to me, his voice trembling with disbelief. Subject: updated dress code and hygiene policy. Effective immediately. The use of synthetic colognes, perfumes, or any artificial scent blockers is strictly prohibited within a 50-foot radius of the CEO's office. Violators will face immediate disciplinary action. Carter slowly lowered his phone, staring at me in absolute terror. "Ollie, what the hell did you do to him?" I looked at the closed glass door of Julian's office, my own strawberry, scent slowly beginning to break through the fading pine cologne. "I have absolutely no idea," I muttered. By 9:45 p.m. on Friday, the 45th floor of the Vance Group building was a ghost town. The relentless buzzing of phones and the chaotic energy of Wall Street traders had long since faded, leaving behind only the low hum of the central heating and the panoramic view of the glittering New York skyline. I should have been on a subway back to Brooklyn. Instead, I was swiping my access badge at the main glass doors, silently cursing my own exhaustion. In my rush to leave for the weekend, I had left a crucial dossier for Monday's merger meeting, along with my favorite, worn-out gray cardigan, on my new desk inside Julian's office. The main office was completely dark. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights, navigating the familiar path by the ambient glow of the city outside. When I reached the CEO's office, I stopped dead in my tracks. The heavy glass door was slightly ajar. More importantly, a thin sliver of warm, golden light was spilling onto the carpet from the private break room, attached to the back of Julian's office. My heart did a strained, nervous flutter. Was someone else here? Marcus Sterling looking for confidential files. I held my breath, stepping inside with agonizing slowness. I crept past my desk, moving toward the slightly open door of the break room. The scent in the air wasn't the usual sharp, intimidating black coffee. It was softer, mellower, carrying an unexpected undercurrent of sugar. I leaned forward, peering through the 2-inch gap. What I saw completely short-circuited my brain. Julian Vance, the terrifying Enigma, the Wall Street tyrant who had made grown men cry in boardrooms, was sitting on the plush leather sofa. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie, the top 3 buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. But that wasn't what paralyzed me. Julian was clutching a piece of clothing to his chest. It was my missing gray cardigan. He had his face buried in the soft fabric, his eyes closed as he took a long, deep, trembling breath. The tension that usually locked his broad shoulders into a rigid line was completely gone. He looked peaceful, vulnerable, and to make the surreal image even more incomprehensible, sitting on the glass coffee table in front of him was an expensive, pastel-pink box from a high-end French bakery. As I watched, completely frozen in shock, Julian lowered my cardigan slightly, reached forward, and picked up a bright pink strawberry macaron. He took a bite, chewing slowly, a faint, contented sigh escaping his lips. "He likes it," The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He didn't hate my scent. He wasn't disgusted by me, the glare, the clenched jaw, the hostility. It was all a front. The Wall Street tyrant was secretly hoarding my sweater and eating pink pastries in the dark to cope with his stress. Suddenly, my phone vibrated loudly against the edge of the wooden desk behind me. The sound shattered the quiet room like a gunshot. Julian's eyes snapped open. He shot up from the sofa, the macaron dropping from his hand. Our eyes met through the gap in the door. For one agonizing second, I saw pure, unadulterated terror in Julian's dark eyes. It was a look of absolute panic, the look of a man who had spent his entire life building an impenetrable fortress, only to have the walls violently torn down. He couldn't breathe. His chest heaved, and the smell of bitter, burnt espresso flooded the room, heavy and suffocating with anxiety. Mr. Vance, I pushed the door open, taking a step forward, instinctively wanting to calm him down. I just came back for my files. I didn't mean to. Get out. The words were spoken so quietly, I almost missed them, but the venom behind them made me stop in my tracks. The panic in Julian's eyes was instantly swallowed by a defensive, blinding rage. He dropped my cardigan onto the floor as if it had burned him. His Enigma pheromones spiked aggressively, transforming the room into a hostile, suffocating space. He was using anger as a shield, weaponizing his presence to protect his exposed vulnerability. Spying on me, Hayes, Julian sneered, his voice dropping to a cruel, glacial register. He took a step toward me, his face twisting into a mask of pure disgust. No, I swear, Julian, Do not use my first name, he snapped, his eyes flashing with dark fury. What did you think you were going to accomplish? Did you think you caught me in a moment of weakness? You think you figured me out? That is not what I am doing, I argued, my own frustration rising. Why are you acting like this? You don't have to pretend. Pretend? Julian let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sent a chill down my spine. He stepped closer, towering over me. You think I want to be suffocated by your pathetic, cloying stench every day? You think I like the fact that my assistant smells like a cheap, sugary mistake of an alpha? The words struck me like a physical slap. My breath hitched. You are nothing but a utility to me, Hayes. Julian continued, his voice dripping with venom, desperate to push me away before I could see any more of his broken pieces. I keep you around because you are convenient, but don't mistake my tolerance for anything else. Your scent is nauseating. You are nauseating. Now get out of my sight before I have security drag you out. The silence that followed was deafening. My hands, which had been reaching out to him seconds ago, slowly dropped to my sides. The initial shock faded, replaced by a cold, heavy ache in my chest. I was an alpha. I had fought tooth and nail for every ounce of respect I had. I had endured the rumors, the late nights, the exhausting pressure of this job. I had even tried to change my own scent just to appease him. But I was not a punching bag for a broken Enigma who was too cowardly to face his own emotions. I looked at my gray cardigan lying discarded on the floor. Then, I looked back at Julian. His chest was still rising and falling rapidly, his eyes burning with defensive hostility. Understood, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I turned around, walked to my desk, and picked up the merger dossier I had come for. I didn't look back at the break room. I didn't look back at him. I will leave the Q3 files on your desk, I said coldly, placing them down. Have a good weekend. I walked out of the office, the heavy glass door clicking shut behind me, sealing him in his lonely, dark fortress. As I stepped into the elevator, my hands finally began to tremble. Julian Vance didn't hate my scent, but he hated himself for needing it, and I was completely done paying the price for his pride. Come Monday morning, he was going to have my resignation letter on his desk. Oliver Hayes, hereby resign from my position as executive aide at Vance Group, effective immediately. The words looked incredibly small on the pristine, heavy stock corporate paper, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken frustrations. I signed my name at the bottom with a steady hand, my cursive sharp and unapologetic. It was 8:00 a.m. on a miserable, rain-soaked Monday. The Manhattan skyline was swallowed by thick gray clouds, mirroring the heavy, hollow ache settling in my chest. I arrived at the office an hour early to avoid any unnecessary conversations. I didn't bother turning on my computer. Instead, I pulled a medium-sized cardboard box from the supply closet and methodically began packing my life away. My favorite pens, a small potted succulent Carter had gifted me, my ergonomic mouse pad, and finally, my coffee mug. Every item I placed into the box felt like another severing tie to the Wall Street tyrant. The cruel words Julian had spat at me on Friday night echoed relentlessly in my mind. Nauseating, a cheap, sugary mistake. A utility, I took a deep breath, letting my natural strawberry scent subtly fill my personal space. I wasn't wearing midnight timber today. I wasn't wearing any blockers either. For the first time since I presented as an alpha, I simply didn't care who smelled me or what they thought. I was done shrinking myself for the comfort of an Enigma who hated himself. At exactly 8:45 a.m., the main doors swung open. Julian Vance walked onto the 45th floor, and the entire atmosphere of the room plummeted into a suffocating, freezing tension. He looked absolutely wrecked. His tailored navy suit was as impeccable as ever, but the dark, bruised circles under his eyes betrayed a weekend devoid of sleep. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked painful, and his pheromones, usually a dominant, crisp black coffee, smelled burnt acrid and violently unstable. He didn't even look at me. He practically stormed past my desk, his eyes fixed dead ahead. "Hayes," Julian gritted out, his voice hoarse. "Bring the Q3 merger files into the main boardroom. The shareholders are arriving." "Right away, Mr. Vance," I replied, my voice completely stripped of its usual warmth. I picked up the sleek leather dossier. Before closing it, I slipped my single-page resignation letter right on top of the financial summaries. He would have to look at it the second he opened the folder to address the board. I followed him into the massive, glass-walled boardroom located at the center of the executive floor. The room was already filling up with the most ruthless investors in New York. Sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table was Marcus Sterling, looking exceptionally smug, tapping a gold pen against his notebook. I placed the dossier directly in front of Julian's seat. "Will you be needing anything else for this meeting?" "Sir," I asked politely. Julian finally looked up at me. For a split second, the cold, tyrannical mask slipped, and his dark eyes searched my face. He inhaled slightly, catching the unfiltered, sweet scent of my strawberries. His pupils dilated, and the burnt edge of his coffee pheromones softened just a fraction, like a desperate man finding a drop of water in a desert. He looked like he wanted to say anything, but the room was full of sharks waiting for him to bleed. "No," Julian said quietly, tearing his gaze away. "That will be all." I nodded, turned on my heel, and walked out. Back at my desk, I finished taping up my cardboard box. Carter walked over, holding 2 cups of coffee. He took one look at the box, then looked at me, his eyes widening in pure horror. "Ollie, tell me you are just reorganizing," Carter whispered, his voice trembling. "I am leaving, Carter," I said, offering him a sad, tired smile. "I am officially done." "What? You cannot just quit. The pay, the benefits. Did he fire you?" "I swear to God, I will key his ridiculously expensive car if he..." "He didn't fire me," I interrupted gently. I cannot do this anymore. My mental health is worth more than his paycheck." Before Carter could argue, a sudden, explosive noise echoed from the glass-walled boardroom. We both turned our heads. Even through the soundproof glass, the tension was palpable. Marcus Sterling had stood up. He was projecting a series of private medical documents onto the massive screen behind Julian. I couldn't read the text from this distance, but I didn't need to. The predatory smirk on Marcus's face said it all. He was exposing Julian's psychological instability. He was calling for a vote of no confidence. The executives around the table began murmuring, looking at Julian with a mixture of shock and disdain. The Wall Street tyrant was being ambushed in his own castle. Julian sat completely frozen at the head of the table. I could see the panic attack hitting him from 50 feet away. His broad shoulders went rigid, his chest stopped moving, and the burnt coffee scent began leaking through the HVAC system, making the air in the outer office feel heavy and suffocating. He was cornered, exposed, and entirely alone. I felt a sharp pang of sympathy in my chest, an instinctual urge to run in there and pull him out. But I forced my hands to stay firmly on my cardboard box. "You are nothing but a utility to me." The reminder was enough to anchor my resolve. Through the glass, I saw Julian shakily reach for the leather dossier I had prepared. He opened it, desperately trying to find the Q3 numbers to defend himself, to prove he was still a capable CEO. Instead, he found my resignation letter. Time seemed to stop. Julian stared at the heavy stock paper. His eyes widened, scanning the single paragraph. I watched as his hands began to tremble, not a subtle tremor, but a violent, uncontrollable shake. The paper crinkled under his white-knuckled grip. Marcus was still talking, gesturing aggressively at the screen, demanding a vote. The other board members were nodding in agreement, circling like vultures. But Julian wasn't looking at them. He slowly lifted his head, his dark eyes snapping through the glass walls of the boardroom, searching the outer office in a blind panic. His eyes locked onto me. He saw me standing by my desk, my coat on, a cardboard box in my hands. He saw the finality in my posture. In that exact moment, the Enigma's mask completely shattered. The realization that he was losing his company paled in comparison to the absolute terror of losing the one person who kept him tethered to reality. Julian didn't try to defend himself against Marcus. He didn't look at the medical records on the screen. He stood up so abruptly that his heavy leather chair violently tipped over, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a deafening thud. The entire boardroom fell dead silent. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, gaping at him. The millionaire investors stared in utter bewilderment. Without a single word, Julian Vance turned his back on the multi-million-dollar the board of directors, and his own empire. He shoved past Marcus, threw open the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom, and burst into the hallway, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and desperate. "Oliver," Julian's voice echoed across the 45th floor, raw, frantic, and entirely broken. I didn't wait for him. I turned my back, stepped away from my desk, and began walking toward the elevator lobby. The heavy stainless steel doors of the elevator slid shut, cutting off the frantic echo of my name. I stood in the center of the descending cabin, my knuckles white as I gripped the edges of my cardboard box. Beside me, Carter was staring at the closed doors, his mouth hanging slightly open, his breathing shallow and rapid. Carter swallowed hard, his eyes wide. Did the Wall Street tyrant just scream your first name and abandon a multi-million-dollar board meeting? "It doesn't matter," I said, though my voice lacked the conviction I desperately wanted to project. My heart was hammering against my ribs, loud and erratic. The scent of burnt, panic coffee had managed to slip into the elevator before the doors closed, and it was clinging to my clothes, making my alpha instincts scream at me to go back and protect whatever was hurting so badly. I forced myself to stare at the digital floor indicator. 40, 35, 20, 10, 1. The elevator chimed, and the doors glided open to reveal the sprawling, cavernous expanse of the Vance Group's main lobby. It was a cathedral of modern capitalism, white marble floors, towering glass walls, and hundreds of suited professionals rushing through the security turnstiles with their morning coffees. I stepped out, keeping my gaze fixed on the revolving glass doors at the front of the building. Beyond them, the Manhattan rain was pouring down in gray sheets. "Ollie, wait." Carter hurried to keep pace with me, navigating through the sea of commuters. "Are you seriously just going to walk out?" He sounded like he was dying. "I am protecting my own life, Carter," I said firmly, adjusting my grip on the box. "I cannot save him from himself." We were 10 feet away from the exit when the unmistakable ding of the VIP Express elevator echoed through the massive lobby. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even turn my head. But the collective gasp that rippled through the crowded lobby was impossible to ignore. Conversations abruptly died. The clicking of hundreds of leather shoes against the marble floor ceased. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the ground floor. "Oliver." The voice tore through the silence, raw and completely stripped of any corporate authority. I froze. I couldn't help it. Slowly, I turned around. Julian Vance was sprinting across the lobby. The CEO of Vance Group, a man who was famous for his cold, calculated composure, a man who never moved faster than a measured, terrifying stride, was running. His expensive navy suit jacket was gone. His tie was loosened, his hair wildly disheveled. But it was his face that made my breath catch in my throat. He looked absolutely terrified. He was closing the distance between us rapidly. My instincts flared, telling me to step back, to guard myself against the incoming storm. But before Julian could reach me, Carter stepped in front of me. My loyal, beta friend planted his feet firmly on the marble floor, raising one hand defensively, putting his own body between me and the approaching Enigma. "Back off, Mr. Vance," Carter said. His voice was shaking slightly, but he didn't move an inch. "He is off the clock. You have no right to." Julian stopped dead in his tracks, mere inches from Carter. In any other scenario, Julian would have fired him on the spot. He would have used his overwhelming pheromones to force the beta to his knees. Instead, Julian looked at Carter, his chest heaving, his dark eyes wide and pleading. "Please," Julian whispered. The word carried across the quiet lobby, echoing with a staggering amount of desperation. "Carter, please. Just let me speak to him." Carter's jaw dropped. The Wall Street tyrant had just begged him. I gently placed a hand on Carter's shoulder, stepping out from behind him. "It is okay, Carter." Julian didn't hesitate for another second. He closed the remaining distance between us, completely disregarding the cardboard box in my hands, completely disregarding the hundreds of employees, security guards, and executives watching us in absolute shock. He threw his arms around me and pulled me into a crushing embrace. The box slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a muted thud. My pens scattered across the marble, but neither of us cared. Julian buried his face into the crook of my neck, his tall frame trembling so violently, I had to brace my legs just to keep us both standing. "Do not leave," Julian choked out, his voice muffled against my skin. "Please, Oliver. Do not leave me, please." His Enigma pheromones were completely out of control, reeking of fear and desperation, but the moment he inhaled the sweet scent of my strawberries, I felt a massive shudder run through his body. His arms tightened around my waist, holding onto me like I was a piece of driftwood in the middle of a raging ocean. "I am sorry," he whispered frantically into my neck, his breath hot against my skin. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean any of it. I was terrified. You saw me. You saw how weak I am, and I panicked. I have spent my entire life building this fortress because I am so damn afraid of everyone. But not you." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. "You are the only quiet thing in my head, Oliver. You are the only one who makes it stop." My heart shattered. looking at the broken, trembling Enigma in front of me. The urge to wrap my arms around his shoulders and tell him everything would be okay was almost unbearable. My alpha biology was screaming at me to comfort him. But then I remembered the coldness in his eyes on Friday night. I remembered the heavy, suffocating feeling of being called a sugary mistake. Slowly, agonizingly, I brought my hands up and placed them flat against Julian's chest. I didn't push him hard, but the rejection was clear. Julian's breath hitched. He stared at me, panic reigniting in his eyes, as I gently but firmly forced him to step back. "I know you were panicking, Julian," I said, my voice soft but incredibly steady. The entire lobby was watching us, but right now, it was just the two of us. "I know you are hurting, but a hug and a public breakdown don't erase the things you said to me." Julian winced as if I had physically struck him. "Oliver, I didn't mean. It doesn't matter if you meant them," I interrupted quietly. "You used my deepest insecurities as a weapon to protect yourself. You tore me down so you wouldn't feel small. I won't be your punching bag just because you are afraid of your own shadow." Julian stood completely frozen, his arms falling limply to his sides. The desperation in his eyes morphed into a profound, devastating realization. He had pushed me too far, and no amount of begging could instantly fix the bridge he had burned. I crouched down, picked up my cardboard box, and gathered my scattered pens. When I stood back up, I didn't look at him again. "Go back to your board meeting, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Save your company." Without waiting for his response, I turned my back, walked through the revolving glass doors, and stepped out into the freezing Manhattan rain, leaving the broken Wall Street tyrant standing alone in the center of his empire. For 3 weeks, I didn't hear a single word from Julian Vance. I spent those weeks rebuilding my life from the ground up. I updated my resume, went a half a dozen interviews, and managed to secure a decent, if significantly less lucrative, position at a mid-tier logistics firm in Brooklyn. It wasn't the fast-paced, high-stakes environment of Wall Street, but it paid the bills, and more importantly, no one there cared that I smelled like strawberry cupcakes. Carter texted me daily, serving as my unauthorized informant regarding the aftermath of my dramatic exit. According to Carter, Julian hadn't chased after me into the rain. He had stood in the lobby for a long time, letting the reality of my words sink in. And then, he had turned around, gotten back into the elevator, and returned to the 45th floor. He walked back into that boardroom. Carter had texted me that night, his message littered with exclamation points. And Ollie, he didn't even yell. He didn't use his Enigma pheromones to suffocate them. He just sat down, opened a laptop, and methodically, clinically dismantled Marcus Sterling's entire argument using nothing but raw data and market projections. He saved the merger. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. It was exactly what I had told him to do. Save your company. But knowing he had succeeded didn't numb the dull ache that had settled in my chest. I missed him. I missed the quiet moments in the office when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his broad shoulders would relax infinitesimally when I brought him his coffee, the underlying vulnerability beneath his terrifying exterior. But missing him didn't mean I regretted my decision. I needed him to be whole, and I couldn't be the crutch he used to avoid healing. On a rainy Thursday evening, exactly 3 weeks after I quit, someone knocked on the door of my cramped, 4th-floor walk-up apartment. I set my lukewarm takeout noodles on the coffee table and wiped my hands on my sweatpants, expecting it to be Mrs. Higgins from next door, complaining about the hallway lights again. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My heart completely stopped. Julian Vance was standing in the dimly lit hallway of my rundown Brooklyn apartment building. He looked entirely out of place. He wasn't wearing his armor, no custom-tailored suit, no silk tie. He was dressed in dark jeans and a simple, thick black sweater that made him look broader but somehow softer. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely, deeply nervous. I just stood there, my hand gripping the doorknob, completely paralyzed. "Hello, Oliver," he said, his voice low and incredibly gentle. "Julian," I breathed, the name slipping out before I could catch it. The scent of black coffee drifted into my apartment, but it wasn't the burnt, panic smell from 3 weeks ago, nor was it the aggressive, dominant aura of the Wall Street tyrant. It was warm, rich, and steady. He didn't try to step inside. He kept a respectful distance, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I know I have no right to be here," Julian began, his dark eyes holding mine with a sincerity that made my chest tighten. "And if you tell me to leave, I will turn around and walk away right now, I promise." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the immediate, biological urge to pull him out of the cold hallway. "Why are you here, Julian?" Julian took a slow breath. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, white business envelope, holding it out to me. "I have been in therapy," he said quietly. My eyes widened slightly. I looked from the envelope to his face. "You have?" He nodded, a self-deprecating smile touching the corner of his lips. "3 times a week. It is exhausting and terrifying." My therapist is a beta who does not care about my net worth and forces me to talk about my father for an hour straight. He paused, his expression turning serious. But she also helped me realize that fear is not an excuse for cruelty. I was so terrified of the world finding out how broken I was that I hurt the only person who ever made me feel safe. I used your scent, your biology, as a weapon because I was too much of a coward to admit that I desperately needed you. I looked down at the envelope in his hand. My vision blurred slightly, the sting of unshed tears pricking my eyes. The apology wasn't just words this time. It was the result of the hardest work an enigma like him could ever do, facing his own trauma. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, Julian continued softly. I just wanted to tell you that, and I wanted to give you this. He gestured to the envelope again. I slowly reached out and took it. My fingers brushed against his, and a jolt of electricity sparked between us. I opened the flap and pulled out a thick, legal document. It was an employment contract with the Vance Group logo at the top. But it wasn't for an executive aide. My eyes scanned the bold text at the top of the page. Position, Project Director, Acquisitions Division. The salary listed was nearly double what I had been making, and the signing bonus was enough to completely clear my mother's medical debt. I looked up at him, utterly speechless. Julian, I cannot accept this. I didn't quit just to manipulate you into a promotion. I know you didn't, Julian said quickly, his voice firm. You quit because you respect yourself, and that is exactly why I am offering you this position. You are brilliant, Oliver. You understand the logistics of this company better than half my board. You earned this role entirely on your own merit. He took a tiny step closer, his rich coffee scent wrapping around me like a warm blanket. Come back to Vance Group, Oliver. Not as my assistant, not as my crutch. Come back as a director. Build your career, and Julian's voice softened to a husky whisper, his eyes dropping briefly to my lips before meeting my gaze again. Let me take you out to dinner. Let me earn the right to be near you again. The right way this time. I looked at the contract in my hands, then up at the terrifying, beautiful Enigma standing on my cheap welcome mat. He wasn't the Wall Street tyrant anymore. He was just a man, holding his heart in his hands, offering me everything he had. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face, and the sweet, happy scent of strawberry cupcakes bloomed into the hallway. Julian closed his eyes for a brief second, a look of profound relief washing over his features as he breathed me in. I hope you know, I said, leaning slightly against the doorframe, that as a project director, I will be wearing whatever scent I damn well please. Julian opened his eyes, a soft, incredibly rare laugh rumbling deep in his chest. I wouldn't have it any other way. The marble floors of the Vance Group lobby still felt like a cathedral, but today, I wasn't walking through them like a sinner seeking penance. I was walking through them like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. It had been 6 months since I walked back through those revolving glass doors, not as Julian Vance's shadow, but as the project director of the Acquisitions Division. My office was on the 42nd floor, 3 levels below the executive suite, giving me just enough distance to breathe and enough proximity to remain the company's rising star. I didn't wear scent blockers anymore. As I stepped into the elevator, the small crowd of employees instinctively made room for me. Not because they feared me, but because I carried myself with a quiet, undeniable confidence. The faint, pleasant aroma of strawberry cupcakes followed me like a signature, no longer a source of shame, but a symbol of my brand. I was the alpha who smelled like dessert and negotiated like a shark. The elevator doors opened on the 45th floor. I wasn't here to deliver coffee today. I was here to finalize the Sterling-Vance merger, the very project Marcus Sterling had tried to use to bury Julian. I walked into the boardroom, and the atmosphere was different. The suffocating, bitter tension that used to define this room was gone, replaced by a focused, professional hum. Marcus Sterling was still there, relegated to a corner seat, his influence stripped down to almost nothing. He looked at me, his lip curling slightly as the scent of strawberries hit his nose. I didn't flinch. I sat down directly across from him, opened my laptop, and offered him a sharp, polished smile. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice projected with perfect clarity. "Let's review the final numbers." The meeting lasted 2 hours. I led the presentation with a precision that left the board members nodding in silent approval. Beside me, at the head of the table, Julian watched me. He didn't interrupt. He didn't glare. He simply sat there, his fingers steepled under his chin, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of professional respect and a very personal, very intense pride. When the meeting concluded, and Marcus had slunk out of the room like a beaten dog, Julian remained in his chair. "Excellent work, Director Hayes," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble that sent a familiar spark down my spine. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I replied, a teasing glint in my eyes. "I believe that settles the Sterling issue once and for all." "It does," Julian stood up, walking toward me. "Now as the CEO, I should tell you that your performance was flawless. But as a man who has not seen his boyfriend in 6 hours, I find myself incredibly impatient." I laughed, leaning back against the mahogany table as he stepped into my personal space. The rich, steady scent of his black coffee mingled with my strawberries, creating a fragrance that had become my favorite thing in the world. It was the scent of balance. "You are the one who scheduled a 2-hour board meeting on a Monday morning," I reminded him, reaching up to straighten his tie, a tie that I had picked out for him this morning in his penthouse. "A tactical error," Julian murmured, his hand coming up to gently cup my jaw. He didn't look like the Wall Street tyrant anymore. His features were relaxed, the lines of chronic stress smoothed away by months of therapy and the simple, profound peace of being loved. He leaned down, brushing his lips against my forehead. "Dinner tonight. Somewhere quiet. No talk of mergers or acquisitions. Only if you promise to let me order the strawberry cheesecake for dessert," I teased. "Oliver," Julian groaned softly, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his face. "I think I have had quite enough sugar for one lifetime." "Never," I whispered, pulling him closer. Half an hour later, I was sitting in one of the high-backed leather chairs in Julian's private office, finishing up some emails on my tablet. Julian was behind his massive desk, his face back in CEO mode, as he took an emergency conference call with our London branch. To anyone watching through the glass doors, he looked like the same untouchable Enigma they had always known, sharp-focused, and slightly intimidating as he spoke in that gravelly, authoritative tone. "I don't care about the logistics of the delay, Henderson," Julian said into his headset, his voice glacial. "I care about the bottom line. Fix it by tomorrow morning or don't bother calling back." He looked terrifying. He looked like the man the world feared. But I knew better. Underneath the massive mahogany desk, out of sight of the cameras and the glass walls, Julian's hand was reaching out. I extended my own, and our fingers intertwined perfectly. I felt him squeeze my hand, his thumb lightly stroking my knuckles, as he continued to dismantle the London branch's excuses with a cold, clinical efficiency. He leaned slightly to the side, his nose hovering just inches from the sleeve of my shirt. He took a slow, deep breath, recharging himself with the sweet, calming scent of my strawberries, while he navigated the cutthroat world of international finance. I looked up from my tablet and caught his eye. For a split second, the CEO mask slipped, and Julian gave me a tiny, secretive wink before returning his focus to the call. I smiled, squeezing his hand back. I had spent years being afraid that I wasn't enough of an alpha, that I was too soft, too sweet, too much of a mistake. But sitting here, in the heart of the empire we were building together, I realized that I didn't need to change a single thing. I was an alpha. I was a director. I was loved. And in this city of coffee and steel, there was nothing more powerful than a little bit of strawberry.